Hello world, Tate here, and in this video I will tell you the story of how I survived from days 8,000 to 9,000 in hardcore Minecraft. In the past 1,000 days, I began converting the land around my nether ocean into a lush paradise, expanded Void Station into a massive sci-fi city, and risked it all looting the ancient city for new building materials. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend the 8,000 days video at top right. It'll tell you how I got here. Here, of course, being the beginnings of Nether Jungle, on day 8,000. I had started working on terraforming the terrain surrounding my nether ocean even before then, so I continued heading clockwise around the ocean, replacing vast amounts of netherrack and soul sand with moss and smooth basalt. After reaching the westernmost part of the ocean, I turned northwards, creating this beach out of clay and merging it with the smooth basalt of the ocean floor and the moss that occupied the inland regions, creating this cool gradient. Speaking of moss, I started making a gentle mossy slope going east, high above the lava ocean. Just to spice things up, I also made this trio of rocky pillars standing around, for no other reason except because I can. But, I mean, that's why we do anything in Minecraft, really. But I didn't want to continue shaping this area quite yet, because I wanted to surround the entire nether ocean with my custom terrain by day 9,000. So I headed south into the Basalt Delta biome, where the nether terrain I had to work with became much more treacherous, and as such, the resulting terrain I created was far more mountainous. Next to the bastion, in this corner of the ocean, I included space for 3 waterfalls, although I suppose at this point they're more like airfalls. Behind the bastion, things got even more treacherous. Most of the terrain you see here didn't even exist. It was all buried in solid rock that I had to systematically carve away to make room for the terrain, leading to the vast cliffs you see at the frontier. Oh, and most of this was basalt, which meant I needed to bring in a beacon to insta-mine it and not have to spend the next 300 years punching rocks in a block game. But as I continued heading westward along the southern border, the mountainous terrain and jagged overhangs gradually gave way to another lava ocean, and so my terrain shifted once again, and I created this broad, gentle river valley. Since river valleys generally have rivers in them, believe it or not, I created a riverbed out of more smooth basalt and expanded it eastward to create this waterfall with no water in it. Look, this is the nether, okay? The nether is supposed to be dry, and yeah, never mind. Anyway, I wanted to take a break from tunneling through solid basalt, so I rounded a corner of the nether ocean to begin tunneling through solid netherrack. But hey, at least I didn't need a beacon to insta-mine that. Still, I wanted to spend more time actually terraforming and making terrain than just destroying rocks from hell, so for the time being I didn't expand the terrain very far beyond the western coast, just far enough to get a basic idea of what the terrain beyond would be like, which, as it turned out, was largely mountainous, so I could hide most of the netherrack under existing terrain. And then the terraforming got even more arduous, because not only were there still overhangs that took hours to clear up, but they were made of basalt, and I was too lazy to keep moving my beacon to stay in range. Oh, and of course there were plenty of pitfalls full of lava and staggering drops capable of dealing quite a bit of damage. But I persevered, first clearing out the terrain in 10-block wide strips, and then slowly filling those strips with moss and smooth basalt, connecting the high mountain peaks to the ocean below. But getting back into the nether wastes again, I wanted to try something different. Instead of destroying this massive overhang, I decided to work with it and turn it into a headland, with a sheer overhanging cliff of smooth basalt plunging about 30 blocks to the ocean below. And under that, I started building a massive hollowed-out cavern of smooth basalt with a system of underground rivers running through it. This is eventually going to be a deep dark themed area, but I'm not going to do any decoration until all the terrain is finished, which will probably take until next summer at least. But with that, the terraforming of the coastline was almost done. Just a few more clay beaches, a couple of cliffs, and some gentler hills, and the entire nether ocean was surrounded in lush terrain by the 8600s. With the coastline completely terraformed, it was time to expand to the inland regions. So I headed north from the northern coastline into a very messy nether wastes biome. I mean, look at this. Some of this terrain is seriously cursed. But nevertheless, I worked tirelessly, well, not tirelessly, I did get tired a lot, to remove the bizarre netherrack outcroppings and build a fancy mountain and cliff, complete with a non-existent waterfall, finally topping out at an extremely high level. So high, in fact, that the moss gave way to smooth basalt entirely. Unproving that will be a challenge, but a challenge for another year. A more pressing challenge was determining exactly how and where Nether Jungle was going to end. After many failed ideas, I eventually decided that having it be a square shape and just building gigantic walls at the border was the best way to go. So I set the northern frontier at Z-250, and once that was reached, started expanding westward again, turning a nether valley to a massive lake bed and creating a range of hills at the edge of the nether waste. Beyond that lay an incredibly vast stretch of crimson forest going out to the future edge of Nether Jungle and beyond. So, of course, it had to be deforested. And then the terrain had to, you guessed it, be yeeted out of existence, because I'm better at deciding what should go here than some stupid Perlin noise generator. And in place of the crimson forest, I decided to create a flat, low-lying plain that I could fill with very large custom trees. So basically, I destroyed a forest so I could make a forest. My goals are beyond your understanding, okay? Anyway, after that, I noticed that my beautiful oceanfront views were kind of blocked by a more ugly, pendulous mass of nether stuff, so I had to, you guessed it again, tear it down, which was pretty easy and satisfying work, despite some minor objections by the locals, leading to a near-death experience. Who cares what some stupid piglins think? And in the final days of working on Nether Jungle before day 9000, I went back to the center of Nether Jungle to finish this mountain and add a giant and very interestingly shaped lake to the top. My plan is to make a hole in the bedrock and have water pouring down into this lake, representing the source of the legendary Nether water. But that's not going to be until the very end of the build, and there is so much more to do. By day 10,000, I'm hoping that all of this will be converted from Nether terrain into the much more pulchritudinous Nether Jungle terrain. Meanwhile, of course, I was making progress on my massive void base, creatively named Void Station. In the days leading up to day 8,000, I built these bridges expanding outwards from the central core, but at the time they were bridges to nowhere. That was about to change. But first, I upgraded to version 1.19, and that meant there were a bunch of new features to explore. I actually don't mind having to go thousands of blocks for new content. It's fun to go on these rare, long expeditions. So I set out on a journey that would take me over 10,000 blocks from home to find all the new features. My first stop was at a woodland mansion where I, liberated some allays, and may or may not have burned down the entire fucking mansion out of spite and left the allays tied to a pole in a nearby lake. Take note, villagers. This is what happens when you dare defy me. Then it was on to a mountainous region to dig into a deep dark and find the ancient city. Fighting the deep dark was easy enough, and despite a shrieker or two, not all that terrifying, but the vast, mysterious ancient city was another story entirely. I made my pinky sore by sneaking everywhere and bridging around with wool, and it took hours to clear the city, and I kept tripping this one shrieker that I couldn't find and having to pearl away and hope that the wardens got bored before I did. Which fortunately happened every time, because being pants-shittingly terrified isn't conducive to boredom. So I managed to get a few thousand of the new skulk blocks, brought my enchanted golden apple count up to 7, and even got the most useful item in all of hardcore Minecraft. And on the way back, I completely ignored the allays and plundered the first mangrove swamp I found, leaving it an absolute mess and getting me plenty of mangrove and mud blocks. After I made my way back to Void Station around day 81 something, it was time to start doing some actual work. So I began working on the first of 3 rings surrounding the central core. The first ring would have 4 main towers, sitting at the end of these bridges, each one holding a different farm. The first one was going to be a shulker farm, so I first got to work building the antechamber, and then above that, a level that expanded outwards to form an absolutely massive room, almost as wide as the central core. The reason for such a beef tower is because shulkers can teleport, and I want to slaughter them, not have them escape to the void. So I had to make sure the walls of my great indoor shulker farm were too far away to teleport to. And it almost worked, but not quite. I still had to do a massive spawn-proofing initiative, using all manner of block to try and make it look at least halfway decent. From these glass panes on the windows to the massive vegetation hanging from the ceiling. And believe it or not, it turned out to be sufficient, but before I knew, I had to build the actual farm. I ended up going with this massive and incredibly complicated design by ending credits, which advertises 1,000 shells per hour, and then after I managed to get it working, which took an endless amount of pain, I had to build a railway to the nearest end city and peacefully persuade a shulker to go for a ride with me. The farm definitely got a slow start at first, but it was working a bit, so I let it run in the background, and as the shulker reactor filled up, it would get faster and faster. It eventually broke for some reason, but now I have 4 shulkers of shulker shells, which is more than enough to open up a new paradigm in storage. I no longer need to store my valuables in fixed, immobile chest monsters. Instead, I can store them in shulker monsters and bring them with me wherever I go. Anytime I need a shulker of something, it's now more efficient to make a new box instead of cleaning out an old one. Who cares? I have enough boxes to last for like 5 years. With that absolutely painful, but absolutely glorious farm out of the way, it was time to turn to the roof. Every other tower I built so far had a fancy roof, so why would this one be the exception? It took a few false starts and some absolutely hideous attempts, but I eventually settled on a hyper fancy floral design with vaguely East Asian vibes. I really went all out, putting a ton of detail into this, with all the nether brick and purple layers, alternating with crimson and quartz, and of course tons of sea lanterns and end rods for lighting. Honestly, this is so extra that I'll probably have to touch up the central core roofs at some point, but I'm saving that until the rest of the building is done. Below the shulker farm, I also built a ton of random decorations to minimize dead space, including this fountain and surrounding gardens, and this little conference room below that. And under the conference room is a secret void room with a trippy floor of black glass, making it look like you're suspended over the void itself. Very fun place, I know. Absolutely not terrifying at all. And building upside down in the void was not the slightest bit scary. Not at all. Of course, symmetry is important, so after that, I set about doing the exact same tower all over again on another corner. Obviously, this wasn't going to have a shulker farm inside, because who needs 2? But you know what I do need? Another tree farm. I'm sick and tired of manually mining crimson fungi over and over and over and over, so I decided to make a farm to do it for me, specifically Raceworks design. But as usual, nothing went to plan, and the farm doesn't do anything at all. I have zero idea what's going on, and so I think I'll just make ENX04's tree farm, since that's simple, and even a moron like me could build it. But first, I had much more building to do. You see, the whole point of the first ring is that it's actually a ring, so I set about connecting the 2 towers using, well, a ring. A narrow circular path made mostly of purple and magenta glass, 2 of the common Void Station blocks. And of course some obsidian, crying obsidian, with the usual quartz floor for contrast. And since having vegetation everywhere is one of the themes of Void Station, but the tunnel is too small for big plants, I filled it with a bunch of smaller vine-type plants and even waterlogged the floor to place some coral here and there. But the middle of the ring looked a bit funny, so I figured the best way to fix that was to hide it by adding a tower. I love building libraries, so I ended up making a massive 7-story library, complete with a fancy reading room in the middle, where the ring passageway connects to it. But I didn't want to just build a library, so I added a couple of unique features. First, I arranged all the bookshelves in random mazes so you can truly get lost wandering around the shelves. Okay, not really since it's a tiny area, but you sort of get the idea. And second, I made it an overgrown library, adding in tons of moss and plants to give it a mystical vibe. And towards the higher levels, I started replacing the lush vegetation with skulk vegetation for no reason at all. Even included a few shriekers to startle people. Very appropriate for a library, I know. Shriekers. And as per tradition, I did a super fancy and extra roof, cramming every bit with flowery decorations. I even mirrored it on the bottom, resulting in spreading tons of warp block scaffolding everywhere and making my pinky very sore indeed. After finishing this tower without dying a tragic death to the void, it was past day 8900 and almost time to make this video. But I did have a little bit of time to start working on the third main tower. There's nothing here yet, but I'm eventually planning to stick a sugarcane farm in here, though I don't keep running out of rockets. And right before day 9000, I started making yet another fancy roof, but before I got too far, it was time. I had survived 9,000 days in hardcore Minecraft. There we go. 9,000. Before we get on to the cinematic you're probably all here for, instead of listening to me yammer on, I figured I'd want to go through the holy tome of magnanimous deities. Thanks so much to all of you for supporting this channel, and thanks to the channel members, Paul1210 and Your Cloudbot. If you want to get a credit like this and or access to the world download, feel free to click join below to become a channel member and or donate to my Ko-Fi at ko-fi.com/theet, link in the description. Also, this took 400 hours to make between the gameplay, recording, and editing, so a like and subscribe would definitely not be unwelcome. Now, onto the cinematic.